Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gaëtane Vernat, and I'm the director of the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Before we begin, I hope you'll join me in acknowledging the history, culture, and stewardship of the land of the Indigenous people of this region. Most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, a Mississauga Ojibwe First Nation. We seek to live in respect, peace, and right relations with them as we live and work upon their traditional territory. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Joshua Yoyman, the Power Plant's Curator of Education and Public Program, who will introduce our first Power Talk guest. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I am, as Gaëtane mentioned, Josh Yoyman, Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery. We're pleased to present 3 Power Talks for the 12th year, thanks to the support of our Toronto, with special thanks to Susanna Rosenstock and her team. The Power Plant, located at Harbourfront Centre just a few blocks south of here, presents contemporary art by Canadian and international artists, concentrating on emerging and mid-career artists who have not typically had solo exhibitions in Toronto or Canada. Last weekend, we opened our Fall 2018 exhibitions featuring an immersive sculptural experience by Carla Black, Vivian Suter presenting an installation of large-scale paintings with collages by her mother, Elizabeth Vield, in La Canicula, as well as the second iteration of exhibitions by Toronto-based artists Beth Stewart and Abbas Akavan. All 4 exhibitions are on view until Sunday, December 30th. To complement our exhibitions each season, we offer numerous education and public programs, so please check our website at thepowerplant.org for more details. Also, I encourage you to visit the Power Plant's booth here at Art Toronto, booth B14, featuring a selection of exhibition-related publications and limited edition artworks by local and international artists. This is the first of our 3 Power Talks this year. Before I introduce today's speaker, though, I hope to entice you to attend our next 2. Tomorrow at 4 p.m., recognizing Art Toronto's Focus California, we'll hear from artist Kota Izawa, based in the San Francisco Bay Area, who transformed historic films, videos, photographs, and paintings into digital animations, lightbox installations, and outdoor sculptures. And on Sunday at 2:30 p.m., Sandra Guimaras, Director of Programs and Chief Curator at the Remay Modern in Saskatoon, will consider questions about the role of museums today, their proximity with the inhabitants of a city, and their ability to create a space in which production can occur. Today's speaker is Cannupa Hanska Luger, a New Mexico-based artist who's working in multiple disciplines. Raised on the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota, Luger is of Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, Lakota, Austrian, and Norwegian descent. So please join me in welcoming Cannupa.
Let's see. I have a mic on my head. Dosha Maragua, Dishkag Nahudosha, Nitawe Hudosha, Cannupa Hanska Awache. Hello, my friends. Who are you and why have you come? My name is Cannupa Hanska Luger, and I am Mandan Hidatsa Arikara, and I am part of the Dripping Earth, or Awache clan. I thank you all for coming, and I thank to be invited here to have this conversation. So I began my practice as an object maker and worked with, I guess, ceramics as a primary tool. And through that process, I was looking at the position that I was placed in, which is one of a Native American artist. And what is the context of that, particularly in the United States, where like all of the work that is to be produced is kind of looked through the gaze of Native art being like a tradition or a historical context to the work. And I started to kind of come across this idea that there's no like name, there's no specific word for art within Mandan Hidatsa language. And so I was trying to think of like, well, what is art in that context? What is art within the context of not having it within a language? If art doesn't have a name within the language, it's not a object, right? It's something else. So what is that other thing? And I started thinking about it within my own practice, and what I realized is kind of like an older, honest interpretation of what art is to human beings in general, which is art is a verb and not a noun. Art is a practice. It's an activity. It's an action. The customary form of art within the context of my community was a conversation where how can I put more in than I take out? And that would be, you know, for instance, if a life is taken in order to create sustenance for food, the hide is also used, the bones are also used, all the parts are used to put more in, to make more effort than what you've taken out, if the life is what you've taken out. And so the visual language that developed from multiple different tribes is this conversation around making your life beautiful. How can you exist in this beautiful way? And not have it as an art object, but as a process. How can we celebrate that process? Within that, I also exist in, you know, the 21st century, and I have access to all of these incredible tools. And one of the tools that I'm kind of most fascinated with right now is social media. So social media as a medium. How could it become a medium? And moreover, like, how will it reinforce our customary practices, which is art being a process, a practice? All of this kind of came into being when I realized like the extent of which I have access to people through social networks. Like, I don't have a whole lot of followers, but I have a lot of followers, which is, you know, I have more followers than I have actual friends, you know, this is what I'm saying. And so there's something really strange to me because I'm almost 40 years old. I grew up without the internet. It didn't come into the world until I was in high school. And relating to it has always been, it's something that I had to learn rather than something that's just a part of my life. Like for my children, you know, like that experience is completely different. So with that being said, I started a project, and this project kind of really reinforced this idea that I wanted to share with all of you today, and really put into question why we do this, why we create this space for art to exist that is the celebration of an object or the celebration of an individual. What is that in the context of human beings, you know, or humanity, or any sort of like living thing? So I started this project, just to jump around, I started this project where it was based on that. I put together an art exhibition, and in that art exhibition, it was a way for an artist to become a curator within an institution without curating. And what I found was if I worked collaboratively with people, then I could curate a show because we worked together on a thing. That also allowed me to work with people who are outside of my demographic. In the US, I don't know if it's like that here in Canada, but in the US, if I'm going to do an art exhibition at any institution, it's going to be one of other Native artists. And my question is, like, we exist at all of these different points of intersection. We have the internet now, we have these conversations. Like, how can my lived experience, how can my worldview be expressed kind of like on a more global level if we're not talking about where our conversations intersect. And so by collaborating with artists outside of my kind of reserved demographic of art people, I got to have a direct conversation about intersection. I got to have a direct conversation with an artist who's outside of my demographic. And I got to reinforce the fact that I don't exist with just Native people in the world. You know, like I have all kinds of friends. And so I wanted to share the story about this exhibition, because in this exhibition I worked with an artist from here, or from, moreover, Northwest Territories, named Kaylee Spitzer. And she's a photographer and works with tintype photography. I'm not a photographer. I work primarily with clay and other materials. And so I like collaborating with artists who I have no idea about their practice, so that my ego and self doesn't get in the way of the collaboration. If I don't know anything about it, I can't have any expectation or dictate anything. So I know my place. I'll stay in my place. Working on this project with Kaylee, Kaylee does photographs, and one series of photographs that she had been working on, and particularly the image that we chose for this conversation, was around missing and murdered Indigenous women from data gathered here in Canada. That data set came up to, the data set that we were using was saying 4,000 missing and murdered Indigenous women. And to me, that number seemed like there were problems with it. One, is it exactly 4,000? And I doubt that. So the question is, are you rounding up or rounding down? And if you're rounding up or rounding down, like either way, there's a brutality to the data, where it's either you are murdering extra people or you're not representing others. And when you relate to data not in a human way, it kind of like undermines the importance of that data. And so now I understand that data is important for creating safeguards. It's important for creating laws and all sorts of things. Numbers are great for that. But it was really hard for me to relate to those numbers. And so working with Kaylee, I decided what we would do is I would take a photograph that she had taken that was a direct representation of somebody who was affected by this data set, an individual whose life was affected immediately. And rather than look at 4,000 as a single number, the question was, how can we create that in scale and understand what 4,000 actually looks like, rather than the number 4,000? And so we started this project where we made, I started rolling beads. And I thought I would roll 4,000 beads. I would make 4,000 beads, and every single one I would touch. And I would care for in a way that perhaps the body that it represents didn't get cared for within our society. Make an effort and turn it into like prayer. Within so many different cultures, this repetition of a practice is embedded in something meaningful and deep. I started that process, and 2 days in, I made 66 beads. And I'm sitting there and I'm rolling the clay in my hands, and I'm saying, this is already too many. This is enough. 1. This is already too many. This is enough. I hope this never happens again. 2. Looking towards 4,000. And in that, I simultaneously became aware, because I was looking at the data gathered here, there was also mapping. And the mapping had direct correlations to extractive industry lines and things being moved. While I was doing this project, I built a deck with Canadian timber. And I recognized, as I was doing this, I'm implicated. I had something to do with that murder. I had something to do with the rape. I had something to do with the trauma, because I voted for it with my dollar. And I'm recognizing this in the process of rolling these beads, and recognizing that I'm implicated in this, just like everybody else is. 3, 4. And it went through this whole kind of like scope where I was sad. I think it literally opened a channel in me that allowed me to feel again and have a relationship to the materials. My relationship to money shifted in the process. and how we voted for these sorts of things. And as I'm working with these clay beads, I went through a cathartic process as well, where I was like, I feel really bad, I feel awful, and also I'm doing something. I'm actually doing something. I'm creating a physical relationship. I'm creating prayer around this. And in those 2 days, what I realized was that moment in the studio was the most beautiful that this piece would ever be. The object afterwards would be secondary to that moment. And so I made this video and created a call to action using social media to produce the beads for this project. And I wanted to share this with you, just so you have an idea of what this looks like. Now, I have a hard time even knowing what my art looks like, because I'm really interested in this aspect.
In Canada alone, the number of missing and murdered Indigenous women was at 4,000 in 2016, as noted in research gathered by the Native Women's Association of Canada. Our goal is to create 4,000 plus ceramic beads by April 1st, 2018. 2-inch beads made from clay, unfired, are requested from our communities to complete a monumental beaded portrait to acknowledge missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, queer and trans people. This community engagement is meant to activate our processing of missing and murdered Indigenous people through the action of doing in a collective effort to say, this is enough. As you create, we ask you to hold awareness that each one of these beads represents an individual from our Indigenous communities that we have lost.
Sorry. This is what it's like. Use the internet. That project began to develop in this way where in just a few months, 3,928 beads came to the location that I left an address to. They came from all across the continent. They came with letters about what this meant to them, who the bead represents, because a lot of the people who participated had a direct relationship to these numbers. And also, there was a mention of the cathartic aspect of it. I traveled to the Armory in New York. I went to what is it called? Just for example, these are all of the institutions that supported this project and gathered people together, worked collectively to make beads and send them to us. There were tons of individuals who did this same thing. Hundreds of people. All of those who participated in it are named, if they wanted to be named, when I exhibit the work. And one thing that I found with this is that there is something in the process of art making that is profoundly beautiful. And the interesting thing around it is when I built the beads, the initial 66 that I developed, they were hollow construction. I have a ceramic background. I built these really beautiful round beads with this sort of intention. But in order to make this a public practice, I had to reduce the craftsmanship and make it as simple as possible. And in that simplicity, you got participation. 4-year-olds to 94-year-olds were rolling beads with me and participating in this project and sending them, where they sent them to the Institute of American Indian Arts, where I went to school, and I began to fire them in a kiln. They were sent unfired because access to clay was simple, but access to a kiln might not be. And so I was thinking about how to develop practices where we can share the process. And I think about that because how people, I was looking at the effectiveness of the internet as far as activism, and how broad that can be shared through liking and sharing. and how like minimal that is as activism. It is like the laziest form of activism. And I don't think it has anything to do with actual laziness, and more so to do with, what can I do? I'm just one person. So I'm thinking now in my practice, how can I develop projects in which we can reduce things, make it very simple so that one person can work collaboratively towards a larger goal. And in that process, now you own the work without possessing it, which is an interesting conversation in the context of where we're at right now, where we're at in society, where we are at as people. Where I am standing up here talking to you using the word I, like the celebration of individualism has had a good long run, I think, in our society. And I'm really interested in how we can begin to undermine that and challenge that. And also, I can't do it by myself, like, which is beautiful. The only way to move forward from this point is to do it collaboratively. And so right now, my practice has been shifting more towards, the back-end labor of putting this work together for all of us. This is like cycling through, but here is, this one doesn't need audio, but here's another just video of what this looks like. That is 64 beads per strand. 64 strands. That makes 4,096 beads. After they were sent to me, I fired them. After they were fired, I took a good old traditional beading pattern, like super methodical mathematics, simple mathematics, but just methodical, and stained them using India ink. It's the clay is from all over the place. It's high fire and low fire. I bisked everything, and then stained them with India ink and redid the portrait in a pixelated fashion. That is pretty much the extent of this sort of work, and I'm really interested in how that moves forward from here. I don't know exactly what that will look like as far as other possible iterations of it. But I am fascinated with, I don't know why it keeps going back to this. It does keep going back to the one. Throughout the whole process, I had help. As the beads were sent to me, there was the Institution of American Indian Arts that provided me a mailing address to have things sent to that could house the capacity of this. There were hundreds of boxes with 18 to 30 beads, There were many that came in larger stacks than that. They had a gas kiln that I got to use to fill with the unfired beads. There was the student body there that helped kind of organize those beads. There was a group called Indigenous Goddess Gang that came through and actually measured between the holes of each bead to see how wide they are, so that when I started to put the image together, I had the distances right. There were just so many points at which it's impossible for me to do this alone. And yet, here I stand by myself on stage, which is really weird. I'm fascinated with the hypocrisy of that. And also, now that this exists, I steward it to several different locations. I have to put it up. I have to adjust it to make the image look right. And along the way, there has been so many different folks who've participated in that, which for me reinforces the fact that the most beautiful that this piece ever was in those little kitchens around the continent and institutional gatherings. Some of the ones that I went to where I directly told people about the process and engaged with them, I I had to slow them down and even remind people that this is the most beautiful it's going to be. Like, folks got really excited about, oh, what's it going to look like when it's done? You know, how are you going to do all of this sort of stuff? And I'm like, be here right now. Like, this is it. This is like, look at all the people around with you rolling beads. This is as lovely as it's ever going to get. From this point on, it's an object. And so I think there's something in that, and something that will create an appreciation for future generations on what art is. I think in our society, we don't have the access to, we forgot how things are made. We forgot about the process. We ship the process away and let the manufacturing happen somewhere else and expect things slick and clean and easy and cheap, most of all, immediately. And I think that relationship has a lot to do with our society and the fact that we don't have a relationship to actually making things anymore. So within these sorts of projects, you know, from an economic standpoint, I'm also reinforcing the importance of art into the future. Knowing more about what the process is that goes into it creates an appreciation for what it is as an object. That is the extent of what I wanted to talk to you all about. And at this point, I'm super open. I'm way more interested in talking with you rather than at you. And so I wanted to create more of an opportunity to have that conversation. And basically just reinforce your statements and questions, because we're never going to get to an understanding point, but I think we should have a conversation around what does this mean to you all. You are here at Art Toronto. You are interested in art as object. How do we bridge the conversation from the capitalist model to a more collaborative model around art? Any ideas? Oh, we're not there yet. I'm really interested because I'm invested.
Are you familiar with the project Walking with Our Sisters?
With what?
Walking with Our Sisters?
Yes.
Okay, so that's where all the vamps were asked to give pictures of tribute vamps.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're laid out in sacred ways, sacred spaces.
Yeah.
They travel around Canada. Have you actually? So everybody can hear? Okay, my question was this: if you were familiar with the installation or the work of Walking with Our Sisters. So is everybody familiar with that, where the vamps were created by people within the Indigenous communities, various Indigenous communities, to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada and children as well? So I was just wondering, had you had a chance to see that installation at all?
I haven't got to see it personally.
Okay. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, and like the use of the single vamp rather than the dual. There's something really beautiful in that sort of aspect, for sure. Like, definitely. Well, it's not mine to talk about.
I don't know if it's working. I'm here as a tourist. I don't know the history of why these women disappeared or why the children disappeared. I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Well, it's systemic kind of globally, in all honesty. Where do I start? The Native people have been dehumanized to a level here in Canada and the United States, and quite possibly globally, that they are not recognized as a whole and complete person in a way that allows atrocity to take place. I don't know for certain. I don't have the truth on any of this. All I have is the experience and an honest interpretation of that experience. I think a lot of it has to do with the control of land. And how land is reduced from a place of reverence to a place of resource, And when you can make that initial step and start extracting from the land at the level in which you do, that puts you one step closer to the edge. And that edge is the ability to take from that which you are from, that which you are created from, one step closer. And I see a direct correlation between our nationalist interests in controlling land as wealth and the eradication of the people who are indigenous to that land, or at least to recognize them not as human beings but as fauna, you know, to the environment, so they can be harvested like the rest. There's all sorts of things like this, but I can guarantee you, in every country we go to, there is going to be this matricide that happens to indigenous people of that landscape, because they are the closest to the environments where these extractive industries take place, and the power dynamic between land as wealth. And in order to own that land, you have to destroy the people who belong to it. So it's systemic, and is, you know, here in Canada, actually, it brought closer to the forefront as far as a conversation. I live in the United States, where we don't have laws right now that give us teeth for grassroots organizations to even gather the data that was gathered here. So that's why I was really interested in working with the data set from here, because it is the only data set to work from. So, and then, you know, 3 days of conversation, 49 different books, and 18 Google searches to really get an idea of what that is. But that's my quick and easy response to how and why. And it's not even caring. This is just words. So, does anybody have anything else to add to that, maybe to reinforce that to the visitor? What's that? Why is it women? Okay, so from how I've experienced it, because I'm from North Dakota. In North Dakota, I'm from the Fort Berthold Reservation. They found oil on that reservation just a few years ago. So I've seen how quickly the workers who come to work within the extractive industry of oil get real lonely, get real sick, and are already being paid to rape the land, begin to rape the indigenous women within that space. When they do that, they recognize that they've done something wrong, perhaps. Maybe they didn't recognize that, and so they try to silence that voice. And in the process of silencing that voice, they step one step closer to that edge and now have beaten. And if they beat them, then they're going to have to murder them and hide them, because they don't recognize them as people. Or they recognize that the direction that they have already stepped towards is ugly. And so to save themselves, and toxic masculinity and patriarchy and all of the things that are celebrated within our social functions, you know, as Western dominance exists in our global culture, this is how that happens. And why it's matricide, you know. And it doesn't, we embedded queer and trans communities because they're not a part of those data sets and are brutalized in the same way within these communities, and aren't a part of the polls or tolls. Yeah. And the extent of that, I mean, this is offset from all of that, but you start looking at a number like 4,000 and you recognize that as the women of that population, then you have to then once again start to recognize how many children are not going to be born within that community. You know, so it's a way to brutalize with lasting effects into the future. We don't even know what that's going to look like in the future at this point. Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like this isn't. I had a question before, and I've got lost in the more interesting conversation a little bit, but I guess I'm wondering with regards to like community work and being a younger artist and just starting out, and there's like a pressure to corporatize and a pressure to make an end product that's like monetarily gonna get you somewhere, and how do you find communities where you can do more meaningful work and where the process is more important, and explore that and still survive, especially in a place like Toronto where everything is so corporate and expensive. That's what I was kind of thinking, because of course I and a lot of people I know would love to like have more time on the actual making process, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of opportunity to. I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting lost in the question. I had a better wording.
No, I get it. You are not going to be successful doing this. Like, and I think recognizing that is where you find
Okay,
your
goodbye.
strength.
No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know how to make a living off of this idea because there's no structure to support it quite yet.
Like the way that we've gone has totally like inhibited this creative process that was like the end goal in the first place, kind of thing. Like this corporate way that we've gone has totally cut it off.
Yeah. Yes, we live in a society that has reinforced the object versus the process. I recognize that I would probably just die trying to get us back to that place. And the reason why I say that is because I exist within a continuum, you know? And for some reason or another, I was fortunate enough to end up in this space to have this conversation. And in the process of doing that, I'm literally undermining my own success to reinforce this as a better way to go into the future and the sustenance of art. You don't get to celebrate the individual, and the individual doesn't get to capitalize. You know what I'm saying? But there might be something more beautiful on the other end of that. You know what I'm saying? There might be something that isn't money that's exchanged, but some sort of social capital. I don't know. I don't know yet because we're in it. And also, like, I'm not sharing the truth here. I'm just being honest, you know? I don't know what that will actually look like because I'm in it. It just looks like circles from here, you know? It's like that bead portrait. All I can see are the beads, and I can't see the big image at this point.
Does that big image come from the interaction between this process? Does the image interact with this process and the process of Aboriginal artists like Rebecca
Belmore?
Belmore,
Yeah.
right. Where does she does this in her own way.
I think it's a...
Have you seen her work?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
the
it's...
other great Aboriginal artists who exist in our art gallery today. Have you been to the art gallery in Toronto?
Not the art gallery.
Well, they had just a new section on Aboriginal art as part of Canadian art.
Uh-huh.
It's a huge, beautiful work with Aboriginal language in it. And that connects with this.
Yeah.
I think there has to be that interaction. You can't be making balls all the time without being inspired and understanding.
Yeah, I'm not making balls all the time. In fact, I couldn't do it. I had to ask everybody to help. But I think, no, you're absolutely right. I think, though, that the practice, like what you're mentioning, Rebecca Belmore's work, this is not a new thing. Like what I'm doing right now this is not new. This is super old. Like this is our customs. This is, and not just us. Every friggin' human being that ever existed at some point had a relationship where we collaboratively made things together, you know? And so that's what I'm trying to reinforce, because I think it's been that way a lot longer than it's been the way it is right now. Yeah. And I don't want to move back. I want to figure out how we can move forward, but maintain some of these customary practices that were, in my opinion, more meaningful, more beautiful, maybe not as financially lucrative, you know?
Talking about creating community.
Yeah.
Strengthening community.
Through creating. Yeah, exactly. She said, you're talking about creating community and strengthening community. And I said, yes, through creating. Yeah.
Before I ask my question, I just want to say thank you for shedding a light on the process behind the piece. As striking as the piece is, these pictures scrolling right now are what I find the most, like you said, the most beautiful part of it. And I just want to say thank you. This is an absolutely stunning, first of all, is to listen to you and for you to discuss this. So thank you for that. And the other thing I want to ask you about is there another piece you're working on that you're going to be exhibiting with a similar process? Because I actually think that I don't know, maybe I'm just greedy, but one isn't enough. I want like more of these, and I actually want to know like if there's any way I can participate in making part of it and being a part of that collaborative process.
Yeah, absolutely. This didn't take a whole lot of overhead to do this project, which was, as you were asking, how does it become financially like viable as a way? Roughly, yeah, I'm putting words into your mouth, but. The cool thing about this was that it didn't take a lot of money from me. It took time, but I also didn't do it alone. So you got to share the weight of all of that. I started on my website, there's a series of projects that I've been calling Counting Coup, where it's working with data and trying to understand data in this same format. So it will probably be beaded portraits or beaded projects, not necessarily portraits, but projects. Where we collaboratively do these sorts of things. But it's looking at data, and it's trying to take, the world we exist in now is heavily influenced by data, and try to rehumanize that and understand it on a personal level. So it's usually working with data sets that are maybe heavy and could reinforce like people's activism through the process rather than just liking and sharing. So yeah, there will be more. I'm working on some projects coming up. I haven't made videos for them yet or described the process, but it is an ongoing thing. Yeah, one is not enough.
Is this thing on? How do you see this going forward? Do you sort of see working with just the Indigenous people within Canada or worldwide, or do you see this connecting with other groups trying to do similar things but not Indigenous?
Yeah, I don't...
Like groups, I'm very involved with the Rwanda, with the genocide movement there. We have groups with that. There's like the Rohingya, there's, even the victims of World War II sort of thing. Like, do you see this as Indigenous going forward, or do you see it as global, other groups within the same process, the brokenness?
I'm really interested in reinforcing people's indigeneity to place. We all belong to the planet, and some of us forgot. Some of our parents had to give up that relationship in order to be something else. So I'm really interested in how that conversation. These are beads. That is not Indigenous. You know what I'm saying? Like that alone. That's a conversation that's much older than that, and it's a real human relationship. They're clay. It's not specific to any culture, but humans. And the data set is the data set that I know, the one that I'm familiar with. I am interested in figuring out how that conversation can expand beyond that. I think, moreover, it's about activism and how people can get involved in a collaborative process that embeds empathy, more empathy on the internet through the act of participating in a larger conversation and a larger project. The beautiful thing about this is they weren't just Indigenous people who made those beads. There were people who rolled beads who would not be friends. You know what I'm saying? They would not see eye to eye with one another because it happened under such a broad umbrella that they collaborated without being close to one another for a united issue, which I think is why I say that's the most beautiful part of the process, that the process can do that. The object gets to celebrate that as an echo, but the process, there's something really beautiful in that, And I'm still trying to figure it out. I don't know, but I think there's something there. Like we were saying, it's much older. Like this is not a new practice. It's very old. I'm just trying to figure out how we can make it exist. Huh? I will. I just got here yesterday. Okay, I'll look.
It's so correct. I wonder why they did it. It's a fast, expensive installation. a re-study of Aboriginal art as part of the continuum of Canadian art.
Yeah.
And I wondered why. Why are they doing it?
Why are they doing it? Why aren't I doing it?
No, why aren't they? Why is the HEO doing it?
Oh, I don't know. HEO? Why are you doing it? Right. It seems honest.
It's important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk, Cannupa. I kind of have more of a comment and perhaps an open dialogue in reference to what you were talking to at the end there, talking about how we're looking at, say, value of collaborative projects such as this in spaces like Art Toronto, where perhaps that's not very prominent. It's my understanding as someone who's non-Indigenous and not like an uninvited settler on this land, that in Indigenous cultures, craft work such as this or projects such as this, where it becomes this very visual language, this visual material language that is passed down through generations, as you were saying, because it's been going on for so long, is very, very valuable, and that in North America and very evidently in Canada, we're losing so many Indigenous languages.
Yeah.
So we're given this craft and this visual language told onto that we can pass down to like generations of the future, which is extremely important. I also find that craft work at times, such as this, is looked at as this very almost lesser second sex form of art that is tied with women just because it was so common for women to kind of do versus the very Eurocentric, painting and sculpture that is looked at as kind of, it was aristocratic back in like Victorian Renaissance era, so it's been given this higher position. And I wonder if you've encountered kind of situations where it's looked at as perhaps like a lesser value and how you deal with those, or perhaps communicate that it is still has like a very prominent position within the art world.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't pay attention, I guess, because I'm like working in clay and beads and fabric and textiles, all of these materials that would be considered craft, versus fine art. I don't know if I care about that conversation at this point, because I'm really interested in, because I'm interested so much in the process. I would rather be recognized as a craftsperson than an artist, But, and then once again, now I'm like, oh, I'm an engineer. I'm just going to get that engineer degree, social engineer, real cheap degree. I don't know. I think I have run against that. I've definitely run into it as far as support goes. I'm supported more so as a craft person than I am as a fine artist. Any sort of grants or anything, it's way easier for me to get a craft grant than a fine art grant. And that seems to be true just as like a native artist in general. It seems easier to get the craft grant than the fine art grant. I don't know why, but I also think I like it better. You know what I'm saying? Like, I fought against it for a long time where I was just like, no, I want you to give me a fine art degree, or a fine art grant. I want to be that. But like, as I'm talking about process a lot more, I'm wondering what maybe is better, as far as recognition goes. I don't know. I don't know how that I went in that direction from the statement conversation you made, but yeah.
Awesome. So we have one more question, but then if anyone else does have questions, Cannupa will stick around a few minutes after. So here's our last question.
Yes, stick around. Thank you very much for your presentation. Maybe it's a simple answer, simple question. How did you settle on one image of one very powerful looking woman to represent the 4,000 plus or minus?
The image came because of the collaboration with the original collaboration. And the original collaboration was between me and the photographer Kaylee Spitzer. And so Kaylee gathered, she created this image specifically for the conversation we were going to have. And the photograph, which is, I think it scrolls through here, but I haven't been paying attention to it. is a part of, let's see. There we go. That's the photograph. And when I exhibit the work, I exhibit them together because it is a collaborative piece. I kind of mentioned it before. I don't see the photograph anymore because I touched every single one of the beads. I can tell you that there are 6 square beads in that 4,000. I can tell you that it was a 7-year-old girl who made those 6 square beads. I can tell you that there is one that has a lotus flower at the top. There's one that has a very distinct thumbprint. Like, the way I've related to it now is I don't see the image as much as I see each bead. But the image is incredibly powerful, and it creates a union of the 4,000, which kind of reinstates this notion of together, you know? So I titled the piece Every One, but there is definitely a together unified image that the photograph actually reinforces. Yeah, definitely. Good question.
Well, very good. Thank you so much to Cannupa Hanska Luger. Thank you all for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing you at tomorrow's Power Talk featuring Kota Izawa, and on Sunday, Sandra Guimares. Thank you.